This video is on topic 7.12, variations in the population. So the level of variation of population can affect the population dynamics, such that the population's ability to respond to changes in the environment, those are pressures that may change, is influenced by the genetic diversity. So the more diverse our population is, the better it is. Species in that population with little genetic variance or diversity are at risk of decline or extinction. And in earlier presentations, we talked about the concept of the bottleneck event. So in this diagram here on the right-hand side, you see that we have a large population size, then represented by the red line, we had some catastrophic event. The population drastically declined. And because of that, by random chance, we could have lost our genetic diversity in the population. Now, if that population isn't able to respond to the changes in the environmental pressures, the population will become extinct, or that species will become extinct. However, if there's sufficient genetic diversity and they're able to respond in an appropriate manner to the changes in the environmental pressures, that population will recover over time. An example of this is the California condors. These majestic birds once inhabited the coasts of California. However, due to pesticide use, such as DDT, it weakened their eggs, and it caused the population to drastically decline. In fact, it was predicted that there was only 14 individuals left in nature. Due to conservation biologists, they captured these 14 individuals, and due to captive breeding, they were once able to bring the population back up to at least 250 now in the wild and 170 in captivity. So this is an example of bringing the species back from near extinction. In a similar example here, we have the black-footed ferret. These ferrets once populated the prairies of Central America, and it is predicted during the 18th century that there were millions of these ferrets. However, due to habitat loss as well as a non-native disease, there was a drastic decline in the population. In fact, it was once believed that these animals were actually extinct. Once again, due to conservation, the population has rebounded. But the problem with this is that a lot of the genetic diversity has now been lost in the native population. Once again, another example. Here is the greater prairie chicken. You can see that pre-bottleneck, 1820 Illinois, these prairie chickens had a very wide range. They basically covered the entire state of Illinois. However, due to habitat loss, the genetic variation drastically decreased, and scientists identified that only about 50% of their eggs hatched due to a loss in genetic diversity. Now, if we look at 1820 versus 1993, the range of the prairie chicken has drastically been decreased in this area. So, those are animals, but let's think about humans here. Would be the Irish potato famine of 1844. Now, this was caused by a blight, and it's a disease that causes a fungus-like organism in the potatoes and basically makes them inedible. This caused mass starvation in the Irish countryside. In fact, over 1 million people died, and due to both starvation and emigration, the Irish population declined by greater than 20% during this time. Genetic diverse populations are more resilient to environmental perturbations, those are changes, because they are more likely to contain individuals who can withstand the environmental pressure. So once again, a diverse population is critical to changes in environmental pressures. And I'll go back again to the idea of antibiotic resistance. So in diagram 1 there, you can see our bacteria. And all the bacteria are not the same. There's genetic differences amongst them. In fact, some of the bacteria will be naturally resistant to the antibiotic. When the patient is treated by the antibiotics, it's going to eliminate all the sensitive bacteria, with the exception of the ones that are naturally resistant. Well, that's with bacteria. This had also happened with humans. Remember, the human population has a lot of genetic variants as well. And one example of this is actually due to the HIV. So scientists actually realized that there are individuals in the population who are naturally resistant to being infected by HIV. This really puzzled them at the time. And when they did studies, what they noticed is that these individuals have a genetic mutation and this receptor called CCR5. This receptor is on the surface of your cells, and this is basically the entry point at which HIV is able to enter our cells and cause someone to be infected by this devastating virus. Due to natural variants in the human population, some people have a mutation in this receptor, and therefore they are naturally resistant to infection with this virus. Last but not least, alleles that are adaptive in one environment, or traits that are in one environment, may be deleterious in another because of different selective pressures. And we've talked about examples of this. So in the top of my diagram here, you can see the rock pocket mice. You can see in the sand, the light mice are well disguised, whereas the darker colored mice are easily identified and picked off by predators such as birds. Well, that's in location A. But if we change the background to location B, what you'll now notice is that those once selective advantages, the lighter fur, are now a disadvantage. And the lighter colored mice now can't camouflage themselves in the darker background, whereas the darker mice now have the advantage and are able to hide from the predator. So what I want you to realize here is that if we change the environmental conditions, one allele may not be advantageous any longer. And this is also true for the peppered moths, the example that I've given many times already. Once again, you can see the dark peppered moth are able to hide in the dark background, where the light colored pepper moths are easily picked off by the predator. And vice versa, when we switch to a lighter background, the light colored moths, once again, are able to hide themselves, where the dark colored moths are able to be picked off. So this would be a selective disadvantage to be dark on a light background.